Hello, everybody, and welcome to Incidentally in the News. We are excited to be here this week with Larry Whiteside, our Chief Technology Officer, and Felix Weiss. I always like pronouncing it like a German, Weiss. Our head of global incident response. Thank you guys both so much for being here today. We're sorry we missed everyone last week. So we're going to catch up on a little bit of news that actually happened last week, but we needed to take some time to dig into it. So our first topic this week is going to be about the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, in the US, that actually had released a report on September 1st. And a couple of unique things about this. So one, Larry, I'd love to talk to you about the fact that this report was actually done in collaboration with multiple nations. Can you talk a little bit about what's significant about that?
Yes, so I think we are starting to see what the future looks like as it relates to the world of cyber and trying to thwart threats, right? Going back to the big banks coming together, right? Big banks typically don't work together other than through an ISAC to share information, but them come together to create some standard operating procedures as it relates to security. Now we're seeing countries coming together through CISA to put out this guidance. I think this is starting to become, what the future is going to look like, that people are finally realizing we've got to do this together. We can't be, standalone islands and individual nations worried about nation states individually. We've got to start working and collaborating and identifying who our best partners are going to be and bringing together a smart collective to, thwart these attacks, because the attackers do this, right? It's utilizing networks. They utilize all the resources at their fingertips, and they will come together, right? There are different groups that will work together towards a singular purpose. But we, for some reason, on the protection or mitigation side, whatever you want to call us, right? White hat, I don't know what, to call us on the professional side, but we've had this long-standing component of, we're in our bubble, and we'll reach out to our small network to get certain things, but at the corporate level, at the federal level, there's just not been a lot of collaboration outside certain walls. And so I think seeing this and seeing all of these actions of collaboration holistically and to be recognized, and I think it's the sign of where we're going to be, as we move forward.
So the report was actually really detailed, and Felix, you had a little bit of time to get into it. One of the things that struck me, given the fact that we were, foundationally an incident response organization that has really grown into this comprehensive security services business, but they listed out 5 or 6 of the most common incident response handling mistakes. Given your frontline experience with all of this and having read the report, or at least some of the highlights of it, what are your thoughts on some of these mistakes?
Yeah, for sure. I think all of the mistakes are knee-jerk reactions on what one needs to do when a security incident occurs, right? When something does occur, the IT team will usually go in and try to clean it up. Of course, that's what they need to do. Or they will try to look up the domain or change some credentials. And what is really interesting about this article is that they say, don't immediately pull the trigger. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction against an attack, because all you're going to do is you're going to let the attacker know that you're onto them, and they're going to go into hiding. They're going to change up their tactics, their techniques, and they'll find a different way to move throughout the network, now with additional security. And it's funny that we saw something very similar when one of the big insurance companies managed to seize back a ransomware payment the other day that was made in Bitcoin. They did that, and now what the attackers did as a result, they're no longer using Bitcoin. They're now using some kind of other cryptocurrency that we can't trace at all. And that's a very similar step where law enforcement or insurance or an organization had this knee-jerk reaction that at first glance looked like, great, we've got it, no problem. But really what it just means is that they've brought them into hiding. They've pushed them into using more stealthy techniques that we can't find. All of these items that are mentioned are common for incident response teams to be aware of, to do, or more or less to not do. And one of the important stages is in general to get a good understanding of the scope of the incident, how they got in, where they've moved, how they've been moving. You need to map all of that out before you're going to surgically kick them out of the environment. But your normal IT guy, your normal IT team won't have that kind of, not necessarily just the knowledge or the understanding, but they also won't have the tools available, the infrastructure available to make that assessment. So really what this article is telling us and is that organizations have a very long way to go to not only simply protect their environment, but also do it in such a way that they're actually getting a result, that they're fixing not the symptoms, because that's what's always happening now. They're fixing the symptoms so that they get to the result.
Yeah. And it, you know, given e-discovery forensics, the time that you need to be able to be in the system, to your point, to make sure that you're properly mitigating and remediating the system, and then going into IT restoration, it's really important that you pause for a moment to make sure that you get all of that data. Otherwise you might miss some big things. That seemed to be like the top #1 problem on the list.
Yeah, and there's very few organizations that will have that ability. We see it all the time during incident response engagements. We ask them for example, a very basic but important artifact, such as your firewall logs. Like, can we have 2 or 3 months worth of firewall logs? And the first response is, oh, we'll have to see how that works. So they aren't at all aware that they need it. And then it turns out they have maybe an hour worth of firewall logs. And that's unfortunately always the case.
Yeah.
Well, you know, for me, one of the interesting things about this is as I sat here listening to you, Felix, talking about some of this stuff, root cause analysis is not a cyber thing, right? It's really something that initiated inside of IT, right? We had a system outage. Let's go back and do an RCA. But if you think about root cause analysis, a root cause analysis is something that's always put at the end of a process of recovery. And so what I've just realized is the entire process associated with root cause analysis, people have historically just not thought about all of the things that they need to do to preserve information and data related to the cause as they go through their recovery efforts, because they're so busy trying to get things back up and get things back operational that they are destroying evidence and destroying all sorts of things that then help in the RCA. But we've done these RCAs and gone through and realized we didn't have all the information, but yet here we are, for me, 28 years later, still dealing with people that go through and are trying to recover. So the #1 thing that we're talking about, don't delete everything, slow down, right? You need to figure out how this actually happened so you can ensure that it doesn't happen again, but we're still struggling with it. It's very...
Yep. Well, I found it to be really interesting. We will be pulling some information from that report for sure to be sharing with our clients in more detail, because it was very detailed. And again, just the unique collaboration of the 5 different nations, really unique. And we work in all of them. So it's really relevant for our company. And that brings us to our second topic of the day. There was another article that's circulating right now talking about the real crazy fast rise in average size of ransom for a business email compromise situation. So I think they were reporting in Q1 of 2020, as early as that, they were averaging around $54,000, and they're now averaging around $80,000. That's in 2 short quarters. That's not over a year. That's in 2 short quarters. And we already know that attacks are happening left, right, and center fast at a much faster pace than before. We've talked about a couple of different BEC cases before. One of them was Virtue Financial. And what I found so interesting about that case was that, you know, the cyber insurance carrier was saying that they might not actually insure the loss because they felt that there was a negligence there in due process within the staffing. And it just opens up this bigger conversation that if BEC is getting bigger and harder, how do we help people better understand the real threats that exist there? And what do we do beyond the human firewall? So, you know, Felix, if you could just take a second to talk us through this increase. And I think you talked a little bit before we got on air about the difference between an average case and then perhaps even the median case and the dollar figures associated.
Yes, for sure. And that's exactly it. To a certain degree, this article might be a little bit sensationalist, where they want to just have a good headline. And similar to ransomware cases, where for various years, we saw all the payments or all the demands being relatively low, and therefore the average was relatively low as well. And then at one point, people figured out, hey, if we just spend a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, and use a little bit more expertise, we can 30x our ransom demands. And that brought up the average by a lot, even though if you would have looked at the median, it would have still relatively remained the same, except for those few big gators, as they call them, that we're going after the big fish.
Yeah, and so again, we've talked a lot about education. We do offer education to our customers. We know that it's really important to inform the human firewall, your employees, your stakeholders, your board, your executives, everyone. But at the end of the day, we also know that the stats are still out there that phishing attacks and BEC, these things are about 90% of the attacks that happen within companies. So maybe Larry, actually, can you just, for the Luddite and me, the resident newbie in cybersecurity, help me better understand if 90% of the problem is with humans, how does like a managed SOC actually help a company mitigate those risks?
Yeah, so let me start by saying, everybody still needs to understand education is still going to be the biggest bang for the buck, right? At the end of the day, the money you spend towards the mitigating of this risk, education is by far going to get you the most value. But what we have to realize, or as my friend would like me to say, so I'm saying, and we also need to realize that that's not the end all be all. We have to put other mitigating controls in place, right? And so the reality is an additional mitigating control is monitoring, right? Having the ability to monitor 24/7 actions that are happening at each input and being able to respond to it. For every organization that across the globe that has a technology stack, when it comes to cybersecurity incidents, there are two components that measure you as an organization and how well or how poor you are. Your mean time to detect an incident and your mean time to respond to an incident. If you can't detect it, right, you can't respond to it. So if it takes you a month, 2 months, 6 months to detect that an incident has happened, the risk just continues to exacerbate itself and get bigger. But then once you've detected it, if you can't respond to it, again, the risk just continues to get bigger. So having 24/7, 365 monitoring, right, of every endpoint and every device that your users potentially utilize to share data, to access email and things like that, gives you a leg up so that when it happens, because I think we can all agree as an industry, right, the statement of if is no longer a thing in cyber. It doesn't matter if you've got one computer or if you've got a million, at some point, you as an organization utilizing technology connected to the internet are going to deal with some sort of cyber incident. And so when it happens, your ability to do those two things, detect and respond to it as quickly as possible, is important. And attackers don't necessarily wait and say, oh, you know what? This is outside their 9 to 5 window, so we're not going to do it right now. We'll wait until they're in the office. So that's not how it works. Right. And so because of that, it's important that you can monitor and have the ability to respond, because a lot of times payloads that get dropped via these BECs, sometimes the attacker then has to do some command and control on the back end to then activate it, right? Because sometimes the point security software have the capability to detect certain things. So they don't put a full payload on it. They'll put something that just allows them to connect remotely, and then additional things like gain administrative control, right? Do elevated privileges and things that'll let them do other things to bypass or surpass the endpoint detection tool. So that monitoring piece is really important today. And, I don't think companies really realize it. And I don't think companies really realize the costs associated with trying to do that themselves. Because building your own 24/7 monitoring shop, right, your own security operations center, I've done it. It is not easy. It is not cheap.
No. Yeah. Well, and, as you were talking, a lot of tech language there, I think I was following. But Felix, I'm going to throw it to you, because if I'm thinking about the Virtue Financial, right? Like you had my brain spinning there, Larry. But so Felix, if you're the incident response team and you get the phone call from Virtue and they're saying, okay, we've had a business email compromise that was likely done initially through a phishing attack. When you're deconstructing, if you will, that incident on the front lines, I think this speaks to what Larry was just saying. You're probably able to see that actually at some point there was a breakdown in the security that people just didn't pick up on. So that those types of behaviors and activities would have been seen and monitored and caught, so that perhaps they wouldn't have gotten to the end result of the actual transfer of money. I think if I remember correctly, in that situation, it was like the chief financial officer or someone thought that the boss was saying transfer 10 million and he just did it. And the reason why it's in dispute is because the insurance company is saying, well, that's just negligence. You should have known you needed to like get a verbal hello that you're transferring 10 million. So that's one argument for maybe there's negligence there. But if it were to tie into their cybersecurity insurance policy, might they have also been able to say, given the size of your organization, you weren't even being responsible enough in the way in which you were monitoring threats in your system, and therefore we still would tell you you didn't have the right posture to secure yourself against this type of thing? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and this kind of goes back to our original topic about the CISA article again. Even if you want to be monitoring your infrastructure, you first need to understand where your infrastructure is, what it is, what kind of logs you can capture, what kind of logs you can audit. And that's where it usually goes wrong already. If you're not setting yourself up to cap the right events, then you cannot monitor efficiently. They might have had a monitoring team, they might have had a security operations center, but unless you get buy-in from the executives, buy-in from the IT team, and a real involvement from the organization to capture the logs to review, then your security operations team is not going to be able to do a good job, right? You're not giving them what they need to succeed. But with that in mind, if they had proper monitoring in place, then they would have noticed a login that didn't make sense, that either was from a location that didn't make sense, or it was a pattern, an abnormal pattern that didn't quite make sense, maybe based on a time or the location or whatever. And then also just the transfer, the sending of the emails might have not made sense. There were a lot of pieces there, a lot of different steps along the way that if they were properly captured to begin with, then monitored, audited, and responded to, then it would have never gotten to that stage indeed. And that's really what the CISA article is also trying to say. You need to capture a whole lot more. You need to capture it for a long time and audit it, which is something where most organizations, such as likely this one in the case of the BEC attack, they were not ready for that kind of attack.
Yeah. Well, and right now, I think as it stands, we haven't been able to follow up on that one. I haven't seen any more press about it. I think they got 6 million back, but 4 million, I can tell you people, that's still a lot more than what you'll pay for a managed security operations center and managed detection and response and virtual CISOs and all the other services that that you really need and should look to outside experts to help you with. So Felix, Larry, thank you guys so much as usual for offering your expertise. And even if I am the only person that walks away getting educated every week, I am glad we get to do these things. And I hope that our listeners and watchers, our viewers, learned a little something today. And again, we'll try to follow up and make sure that content from that CISA report is actually shared more broadly so that people can be better equipped to handle their incidences in the future and maybe even avoid them. So thank you guys for being with us this week.